again for joining us on this Saturday for another podcast. As you can see, we have expanded since the last time that we were on air. Today we are joined with two lovely gentlemen, Nate Ortiz and
Hello.
Nicholas Nayola.
There you go.
Nayola.
Yeah, you
yes.
got it.
All righty. And so before we get started, we are going to ask them to tell us a little bit about themselves. So, Nate.
So my name is Nate Ortiz. I am a husband to my wife, Roxanne, father to two beautiful young girls. One's a senior in college. The other is a senior in high school. So we have a big summer celebrations, coming up soon. I grew up here in Miami. I'm originally from the Bronx in New York, came here when I was 7, and have kind of been in and around this area and this church. I went to Killian High School and didn't live far from there and lived really very, very close here. So professionally, I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Baptist Hospital of Miami. And on Monday, I just celebrated my 18th anniversary there.
Woohoo.
Nice. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nate. And now Nicholas.
I'm just trying to be like Nate when I get older. So my name is Nicholas. I've been married to my wife, Norma, for 4 years, going on 5. In August, we have one son, Nicholas Jr., and we have our second on the way. He'll be here in June. Hoping to have a bunch more. That's one of my goals in life. I'm the student pastor here at Riverside. I did my undergraduate and master's work in New Orleans. So I am the student or the youth and young adult pastor here. Also a philosophy student. If anybody cares about that kind of stuff, I'm doing another degree in that. And I've been doing ministry here at Riverside Baptist Church for about 4 years now. And we've loved every minute of it. So that's my story.
All righty. Thank you. Any questions for the gentlemen before we get
I
started?
say let's just get started.
Let's get started.
Let's do it.
Okay, so one of the topics we want to talk about today is communication. Mm-hmm. Women communicate different than men. There's this read that says, men are from Mars. Is that
Women
it?
are from
and
Venus.
women are from Venus. Right. So I want to pose the question, why do you think that is? Like, if you ask a man a question, you expect to get details, but the man would say one word or maybe just a nod. So why do you think that is?
So the question is, why do men
and women communicate differently?
so differently? Yeah.
Why are you guys
I'll tell you what I've learned from my wife.
Okay.
Right. And so thank God for her. And so the communication is very different. I think, at least for me in my experience and what I've learned over time is the emotional aspect and how you feel about something is when you say the details, that's an important part of the details, at least for me and the women in my life. And not that those emotions aren't important to us in terms of how we feel, but just kind of think through social norms and other things of how you learn to express that winds up manifesting different in how you communicate. And I think what I learned for me and my wife and our lives together is by nature, I'm a fixer. And so when problems arise, I immediately am trying to figure out how do I solve this problem, and how I process that is very different than how my wife or my daughters will process something. And they first need to understand how they feel about it before they can decide how they might want to deal with something. And I'm kind of the other way around, which is, what's the desired kind of outcome? And then I might need to process, how do I feel about that process? And so it's kind of a little bit different. And so anyways, that's that, at least for me, that's why it is different in my house. Yeah.
Understood.
Yeah. I would say one of the big differences, I think, in our relationship is that my wife tends to over-explain stuff. So, we'll come home from work, and normally when I come home from work, we have this typical routine where it's I'll kind of tell her how my day went, and she'll tell me how her day went. Now, when we do that process, my stories about how the day went are typically done within like 1 or 2 minutes. You know, I could tell her, boom, boom, did this, this, and this, and then came home, you know. But she could over-explain a story for about 5 minutes and just go on and on and on. And so I think one of the things, now that's kind of like a lighthearted issue, but I think the way that does kind of manifest itself in more serious issues is that my wife is very like detail oriented. You know, she wants to like very, very much express how she feels about every issue, you know, that we're discussing. And I think when it comes to us like just dealing with tension or dealing with problem solving, I'm much more kind of like, okay, so what are we gonna do? Like, what's the main point here? Like, can we get to like the moral of the story? And so I just noticed that doesn't necessarily put us at odds. Really, that could go together very well if you know that, you know, your partner is like that. But one of the things that it does kind of just put us in different boats, you might want to say, is that I'm really listening to a story because I want to hear the point. I'm not listening to a story because I enjoy storytelling. Whereas her, on the other hand, I think she really does want to express, you know, herself and all of her emotions and all of her thoughts whenever it does come to explaining or, you know, communicating with me, which I understand. And honestly, I enjoy it. I think it's kind of funny. And so it keeps things exciting.
Well, it's interesting because you're both bringing up a point, which is social norms and wanting to fix it, right? Because you're wanting to get to, okay, what's the juice of the story? Because I want to figure out what goes next, right? Like, how do I fix this? And you touched on the same thing, right? It's the social norms and I want to fix it. And so if the social norms are, okay, just be direct and to the point, and let's get to fixing it. And you've got, you know, women that are saying, no, I want to be expressive and I want to give you every little detail so that you know the details when you go to fix it.
Yeah.
The other part is sometimes women don't want you to fix it.
Yeah.
Women just want you to be there to listen to the 5 minutes, the 10 minutes, however long it takes, to your point, on the emotions of just let me get it out. I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm not asking you to do anything. I've just been holding this all up inside and I need to get it out. Can you just be that sounding board?
Okay, Angie?
I have heard that plenty. Like, you know, there might be an issue going on with one of the girls, and you know, my wife, like, as I'm walking in the room, is like, just listen, right? Just listen, because that's what they need. And so yeah, right. So I think this is I think that you've got to be open to having flexibility in how you communicate. If your true intention is like understanding, so we can learn, right? We can learn.
Right. Ladies?
I really appreciate the perspective you've offered as husbands and dads to understanding. I mean, I think that's the success of a relationship, is understanding one another and giving space for one another to be who they are. But to your question, which was why? Why is this way? I think that it's because we're wired naturally and created differently to complement one another, something you brought up. You know, men, ever since the beginning of mankind, hunter-gatherers, we got to feed the family, we got to do what we need to do to keep things rolling, keep things going. I don't have time to dream about it. I got to just do it. Where women, we're the nurturers, and we want to be connected. We're not only do we want to be, we want to be because we're created to be connected and make sure there's that sensitive, feeling, inclusive part of any relationship with other people. Humanity is both. You know, we talk about the mind and we talk about the heart. And so here we have this beautiful created image of the Creator in both. And so I think that's the why, because it's how we're wired to be. And I've learned a lot from men professionally that I don't need to do the dance.
Exactly.
Especially if I want to be heard well, because I kind of want to fix things too sometimes, you know, and maybe I need to squeeze out my emotional juice. So I respect very much the, hey, I had someone who worked with me once, a female actually, who said, can you get to the point? And I value people who help me.
Okay, Dr. Brown?
I appreciate the perspectives, and yes, there's a stereotype of the detail-oriented woman and the fixer man. I'm a fixer because I'm a nurse. I fix. If I can't fix, what are we doing here, you know? But there is the emotional element that wraps itself in that. And so my question to the men is, what would you say to women, as much as we're complementing each other? We live in a society that's going, we're moving. I have things to do, you have things to do. We're all fixing, we're all providing, we're all cooking, we're all cleaning, at least in my house. And so what would you say to women to help the communication? Because we want to talk. I've been married 37 years. I've learned not to talk. You know, so what would you say to us to help us figure out how to communicate with our men?
Yeah, I would say a big one for me would be, I don't know if you want to take this. I would say a big one for me is that, like in my relationship with my wife, what I need from her sometimes is just kind of remind me, hey, I need you to take the initiative and make sure that we have our time going out on dates, spending quality time with one another, not constantly just in that kind of 9 to 5 routine that you lapse into. And in her supporting me in that way to take the initiative and making sure that we have time to just devote to developing our relationship, I know that, when it comes to date night or when it comes to just, hey, quality time between me and you, I'm here for this. And so I'm not thinking about what I got to do next because I know that this moment right now is, it is, you could say, the task at hand. Like I need to care for my wife and protect her and pour into her. And so I think for like if I was to, I guess, be talking to a younger girl who's thinking about entering into a relationship, I would say to her, don't be afraid to remind your husband that it is his duty to make sure that he's making you feel cared for and nurtured and all of those things. And so just speaking up in that way, I think is super helpful for men. I know if my wife were to speak to me like that, I would be super encouraged by it. I'd be like, oh yeah, you're right. Let's make sure that we're doing that. So yeah.
Awesome. Nate?
I think you're asking that advice. I'd say like acknowledge the effort some in the sense that, so I'll give you an example. It's not necessarily about communication, but it's about connection and time, which is I have about an hour limit at the mall. That's what I've got,
my
right?
gosh.
After about that hour, I am squirrely. If we haven't accomplished what we need, right? If we haven't gotten what we need to, chances are I'm not going to find it in hour 2 or 3. And but it's important in terms of spending time with my wife. That's something that she enjoys doing, so it's important to her. It needs to be important to me. But when those things kind of happen, is that reinforcement, that acknowledgement of, hey, I know this may not be your comfort zone, but I recognize that you're making that effort. I think it goes a long way. So in communication, if I am trying to hold back and I'm not fixing and I'm just trying to listen, acknowledging that. And I think that goes like for anybody, right? Like, reinforcement of where people are at and the efforts they're making, I think is important. So I don't know if that's like necessarily just advice for women. I think that goes the same for anybody. Yeah.
That was very helpful to me.
Yeah.
Excuse me for stepping on. It's helpful to hear both of you say that because you just said something my husband says to me, which is, if it's important to you, it needs to be important to me. And I truly get frustrated by that comment. I don't want it to be important to you because it's important to me. I want it to be important to you because it's important to you. That kind of game. And so I'm sitting here reflecting and letting my heart sink into the reality that, no, you really want us to give you the task of communicating. You want us to give you the task of quality time. You thrive in task and check. And so let it go, Angie. Like,
Let it go.
do it.
Easier said than done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think the other point that you brought up is the reinforcement, right? Like, kind of like, tell me, hey, thanks for doing this, or, acknowledge that I'm doing this for you. And I think that also lends itself on the communication side of, don't just come and tell me when I've done something wrong and just tell me, okay, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. Tell me, wow, you did this really great. I know you don't want to spend an hour at the mall, and I so appreciate that you did this with me. Instead of, really, you're already asking to go and it's only minute 45, right? It's the different way of reinforcing, the positive reinforcement aspect of it.
Sometimes we don't know. So the reinforcement isn't just like, hey, I appreciate it. It's also, for me, validation of, I think this is what you want, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Like we're watching American President again for the 50th time. I think this is what you want, and like I need to be focused on it like it's the first time, and so that validation also is helpful for us.
Men tend to engage in playful antagonizing, as I was reading an article, and because they like to tease and all of that stuff. But women sometimes may feel that could be kind of hostile. Because even with my husband, I mean, sometimes it gets on my nerves, What do you ladies think? And men, why do you prefer to tease than to engage in a more strategic conversation? You guys prefer to be playful than to actually be serious about the conversation when your wife wants to say something. Tell me.
So, there is this difference piece on, we already mentioned the emotional side of that. There's this physicality piece too, and men do communicate in physical ways. Like you see gentlemen seeing each other and they're longtime friends. Maybe they haven't seen, like, it's not like a casual handshake or a little hug. It's like, right, like, pow, we're like trying to break each other's hand. But it's a way in which we communicate. And this playfulness piece is, I think, you were mentioning things that are kind of inherent in that. It's just one of the ways that happens. So it's a way of intending to communicate in a positive way, right? I can send a message just on how tight the hug is that I give my wife.
That's true.
And I may not choose to verbalize that.
That's true.
That's good.
But there's a piece around this. So the playfulness to me, at least for me, it's kind of rooted in that.
I wonder if that's where you get some of the reinforcement. If we respond, maybe without the words, but in the physicality.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a great point. It's not only a way in which it's a way in which we receive communication too, right? So that hug, if it just comes with a side glance versus a return hug, that speaks to me. And sometimes that might speak to me more or better than words.
So a woman would get all dressed up and all of that, come down the stairs and say, "Hey, Nate, hey, Nicholas, how do I look? You like this outfit?" And nothing. Like women, we solicit. We solicit.
Acknowledges it.
Nate's like, I live with 3 women. Trust me, I'm acknowledging.
There's only one right answer.
We solicit to get reinforcement that, hey, I'm looking good. I'm going out. I'm looking good. And you guys just like sometimes turn a deaf ear. Why is that?
I think the way I would put it is like there's something in the back of your mind as a man that's like, oh, this is the perfect setup. Like, let me do that. Like, if I want. I would imagine that like when it comes to the playful teasing like aspect of it, I grew up. I had 3 older brothers. Like we were outside all day. We played around with each other all the time. So for us, I mean, there's just something about teasing other guys that just comes normally to you. You want to see if you can bother people, see if you can kind of push their buttons, see how far you can go with them. And I think that's just like one way to get an idea of where people's boundaries are. And so in a weird way, like when you see like 7 and 8-year-olds fighting with each other, like in a weird way, they're building a relationship with each other because they're trying to know like, okay, no, that does hurt. This doesn't hurt. Okay, we can have fun in this way. We can't have fun in that way. And I think when you get married, and, I've realized this because I've not been married as long as Nate, you realize like your wife is your friend and she is your wife. So you kind of like sometimes are on that border of like, all right, I want to talk to her like one of my friends. And at the same time, like, no, like the Bible says that a woman is a weaker vessel. You must hold her with higher honor. And so like, you also got to understand that you're dealing with something that's much more delicate than like one of your buddies, And so for me, the reason that I like me and my wife play around a lot, messing with each other about different things. But the reason I think we enjoy it is because we have an idea of where each other's boundaries are. We know when it's playtime and we know when it's not playtime. We know when, hey, this is something serious that we have to discuss, that we have to deal with. Or, hey, it's 8 o'clock in the morning. We're just hanging out in the bed. Like, let's mess with each other about, what she's watching on TikTok or like what I'm reading or whatever, And so I think that's where the playful teasing comes in, is that guys, I think, grow up developing relationships that way. And then when you get into your relationship with your wife, you got to have those downtimes where you're like, yeah, we could play around a bit and tease one another. But all that considering the fact that you should know each other's boundaries, when it comes to that kind of thing.
A thought just came to mind, and before I let you ladies speak. Why is it that if you say to your spouse, hey, when you finish cutting the lawn, I need to have a conversation. Anytime you mention and say, hey, I need to have a conversation, why do you guys put up walls and think it is something bad or something? Like I was looking at TikTok. Sometimes I do look at TikTok. And this guy was going to mow the lawn. And his wife said, baby, when you're finished, I need to talk to you. So you know what he did? He put down his lawnmower and he went and he got a scissors. It's just hilarious. But anyways, why is that you guys feel when your spouse say, I need to have a conversation? What goes through your mind instead of just having a conversation, all kind of things start happening like, I wonder what you want to talk to me about. And you guys put up walls.
Yeah.
Tell me.
What do you think?
I mean, I think it goes back to this like fixer kind of mentality piece, right? So if I have to preface that we need to carve out specific time to talk about something, it's probably a serious topic. So my head is going to immediately go to what needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
And that may not be the situation at all. It might just need to be an important decision that needs to be made jointly. So it's not something that I need to fix. It might be something that we need to discuss or make a decision on. But generally speaking, when you say, hey, why would the wall come up? It's, well, what needs to be fixed? And if it's put in context of how you were saying, which is like, my mind is focused on like, I got to cut the grass. I got to get rid of all the clippings. I got to put the lawnmower back and make room in the shed for it and get everything up right and make sure that it's tidied up in the garbage. And will I have room for the rest of the garbage of the weekend to also fit in? Or am I going to have to cross the street and put it in my mother-in-law's, garbage can? And like, if my mind is there, and then I'm going to, you're like shifting the paradigm, to defense mechanism, right? Like, can I just pause this so that I can try to work through what I need to do at hand?
Right, so you would prefer that if you need to talk to your spouse, just start talking. Don't just say, hey, I need to talk to you, because then your antennas go up and say, hey, this is a serious conversation.
Well, I think the other part of it is how have you conditioned your husband, your partner in that, right? So if every single time every time you say, hey, I have to have a conversation, it's going to be something serious or something that needs to be fixed, then of course their walls are going to go up, because the trigger mechanism is if X, then Y, right? So, however, if the socialization within your relationship happens to be, hey, I want to have a conversation, and it might be like, hey, do you want to go out tonight, right? Like it's always mixed, then that wall may not go up as quickly because there's nothing to worry about, right? There's nothing I'm going to have to fix. It might be like, hey, it's actually pretty cool. We're going to figure out, I don't know, what movie or something, I don't know, right? It's just, if every single time you say I have to have a conversation, there's always something really serious that comes with it. Even I, as the woman, would be like, dude, hold on. Right. And I get you, right? It's like the compartmentalization, like, let me put this in this box here and then I'll deal with that box there.
Yeah. Right. Dr. Brown?
It's a life story, it's the life stories we create and we condition. I know if certain things are said, I'm like, okay, what happened? And I know if I say we need to talk, he's going to immediately put everything down and say, what do we need to talk about? Because he knows how I function, So I think if nothing else, learning from each other today is the concept of be conscious of the other person. Be conscious of the conditioning. Yes, we are conditioned. 37 years of marriage, we're conditioned. Kids growing up, boys growing up with your brothers, they're conditioned. I'm not a playful person. My husband plays with the kids, not with me. And so I'm listening to you all and I'm thinking, maybe I should be a little bit more playful as I get older. But I'm always doing something. There's always something to be done. Where do you find time to play? But it's a communication mechanism. The more I think of it as you gentlemen speak, I'm thinking, wow, that was communication. I missed it. And God forbid you miss anything. Don't tell me I missed anything, So I think it's a matter of conditioning and understanding. And I think that's what communication is about. Understanding we're created differently for a reason. And somehow bringing those differences to a oneness place where we can be beautiful for everybody and we can have relationships that are honoring.
Right. So now, okay, go ahead.
I have really good advice also for women. don't say, hey, I need to talk while he's mowing the lawn. The chances are he's not going to hear you, and it won't go well. Right? So pick and choose the times when we
Right.
need to engage in that.
Go get a head nod back.
Right.
Right.
And maybe we should say it in a playful way versus a
Maybe.
serious way.
So I was
Received
surfing,
differently.
and there are three noticeable differences. Women tend to apologize more often, which can signal weaknesses to a man. Do you guys agree with that? That if your wife apologizes, that's a sign of weakness? I think that's a sign of strength. I'm confident in myself that I know if I did something or if I hurt someone's feeling to apologize, you know?
Yeah, I would say if you're overly apologetic, then it probably does reveal some insecurity that you may have. So if I have a negative interaction with somebody and I feel as if it was not a good interaction, but they were in the wrong, and that's why it was not a good interaction, I'm not going to say I'm going to feel overly confident about that. But if I walk away from that situation thinking to myself, okay, did I display Christian values? Did I speak what needed to be said in that situation? Did I offend them anyway? And I come away from that situation telling myself, none of those things happened. What took place needed to take place. Then I'm going to walk away from that situation thinking, okay, I don't need to feel guilty about this. I would say that when I've seen my wife deal with conflict, that sometimes she does have a little bit more vulnerability when it comes to those things. She thinks to herself a lot more about whether or not she could have done something better, whether or not she could have said something differently. And so sometimes I do find myself in a situation with my wife where I have to reassure her, hey, in that conversation with that person, in that interaction, you did what needed to be done. And so I wouldn't say I would ever think of it as weakness. That's not the perception I would walk away. But I would think about it as being more of a vulnerability to, am I really reflecting on myself the way that I should be? And whereas for me, I would say typically that kind of processing doesn't take as long for me. But for her, I think it does. And so I don't know if, yeah.
I'm thinking, I've been reflecting for a few minutes that before we were husbands and wives, we are women and men. Mm-hmm. And so where does the social normalizing start? When we're younger, whether we have brothers or sisters or how our parents interacted, but also in just the social outside the home area, school. And this is changing, I think. Society is conscious and changing some things. Boys play with trucks and girls play with dolls, and a boy revs up and we say, oh, he's all boy. A girl revs up and we say, sit down, And so why do we say sorry? Because somewhere along the way, someone told us that we don't communicate like that as a girl.
That kind of
Right.
forceful
Right?
attitude is
Exactly.
not
So,
correct.
there's more to this conversation about communication than just in the primary male-female relationships we
Yes.
experience.
Definitely. So we are going to leave the last word to Nate. What is your perspective?
I mean, as far as your question of do I view that as a sign of weakness, I will tell you no. I mean, I think if you do something that is wrong and harms someone and hurts someone, the right thing to do is to apologize. And so it's not a sign of weakness. I think it takes a lot to admit when we have done wrong and to seek to make amends with folks on that. So I do not view that as a sign of weakness at all. The only in this piece of men and women and how we do that, the only thing I would offer in that is save the apologies for things that actually cause harm. And so if my wife were to, she makes my favorite meal and it doesn't quite come out the way that she wanted it to, and if she were to say, hey, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, it's not I still got fed, right? So this process and end point, right? There's no harm that's come from that. So you don't need to apologize, but save it for when there's actually something wrong.
Yeah. Okay, so there you have it. Thank you, Nate. Thank you, Nate. Thank you, Nicholas.
Trying to be like Nate.
Trying to be like Nate in the future.
better.
Okay, so thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed our podcast today with these lovely gentlemen, and hope you learned something. Remember, find what works for you and communicate effectively with your partner, with your friends, with your family. And Laura, take us out.
Remember, please look us up at GWEnrichment.com. See you soon.